What is up, you guys, and welcome back to my channel. For those of you who went to this past crime con, I'm sure you noticed that I was not able to make it to that one, but I hope you had an amazing time. It was very hard to get on social media and see all of the people that I love in the true crime community together and having a great time, knowing that I just was not able to make it this year. But for those interested in next year, from what I'm hearing, it's going to be in Las Vegas, and I will absolutely be at that one. So that is something to look forward to. Now, today, I'm actually looking into a case that has been covered quite a handful of times on YouTube, and I remember when this disappearance happened. You guys are always really awesome on social media about reaching out to me with new missing persons cases, ones that are current, ones that are happening close to you, and I remember getting flooded with this missing person poster for Jason Landry, and before I was able to really get into it, I saw a few other YouTubers covered it, and I wanted to kind of give it a little bit more time before I covered it, but I knew that I wanted to do a video on it because it is so weird. It is very bizarre. There's people all over the internet trying to figure out what happened to this young man. And as a mom, it just has been like something out of my nightmares. And I wanted to make sure this case got as much exposure as possible because I feel like there has to be something going on here and someone has to know something. And I say that all the time and people always tell me that's so cliche, but it's very true. And it just takes that one someone to answer a lot of questions. So the gist of this case is that 21-year-old Jason Landry vanished very mysteriously after he wrecked his car on an unlit rural, I'm talking like kind of middle of the nowhere road in Caldwell County, Texas, which is right outside of the town of Luling. And this happened December 13th into the early morning hours of December 14th of just 2020. So like I said, a much more recent case. Unfortunately, I don't know a whole lot about Jason. There's not really a lot of information out there about who he was as a person and his backstory, which I usually love to include in these videos so you are able to make some sort of connection with him and will remember him. But it seems like most people are just so focused on trying to figure out what happened because none of it makes sense. I do know that he had, I believe, 2 brothers and a sister. His father actually used to be an attorney and then ended up becoming a pastor. And he was in his very first semester of college going to Texas State. And obviously, going into college, your first semester in the middle of COVID, probably not the most ideal situation. I'm sure it was a little bit challenging for him. I know he had to self-isolate 2 different times, and obviously it's probably really lonely and a very different experience going to college for the first time during that type of situation. But he was really excited to be going to Texas State. He hoped to get into the music department. He wanted to work with, I think it was technically called sound engineering, and he was with his family Thanksgiving break, so right before Christmas break when he disappeared, and he had only been home, I think maybe 2 to 3 times total at that point, but in Thanksgiving he was very excited to go back to school because in the next few weeks he was going to try out for the music program, which would get him into the major that he wanted to be in. From my understanding, and according to an interview that was done by John Lorden, which by the way I highly suggest, John Lorden speaks to Kent Landry, who is Jason's father. It's about almost a 2-hour interview. Again, I'll have it linked down below. Highly suggest it. But they didn't really know when exactly Jason was coming home for Christmas. They figured maybe he'll come back after, he deals with the last of his classes, or maybe he'll wait a couple of days and spend time with friends. From my understanding, Jason and the rest of the family were kind of waiting for Jason's sister to fly in to come home. So on the 14th of December in the early morning hours, I want to say it was probably around 2 a.m., Kent ended up getting a very unexpected phone call, and that was that Jason's car, his Nissan Altima, had been in a car accident and it was towed to a tow yard. The car was registered to Kent, so Kent obviously needed to come and pick it up. And this was a huge red flag for him, obviously, because he's hearing, okay, my son's been in an accident, but there's no information about him. Like, is he okay? Do you know where he went? He had never called his dad, which you would kind of assume he might have done had he gotten hurt or for help getting a ride. And Kent also had a tracker on the phone, like a Find My iPhone feature on Jason's phone, and saw that his phone was still in his vehicle at the tow lot. So obviously this kind of kicked him into high gear. So he headed from his home in Missouri City, which is just outside of Houston, which is exactly where Jason had been heading, to just in Luling, where the car lot was. Around 5 a.m., Kent made it to the lot. I don't know if he was expecting to see Jason there or something, but he was in fact able to get into Jason's car. The driver's door was unlocked, and from there he was able to find that Jason's phone had gone down between the center console and the driver's seat. So it was like all the way down at the very bottom, like near where the seat attaches. It was still on, it still had battery, but it was locked, so he couldn't really get in it to see any information. So at this point, I can imagine frantically trying to figure out where on earth his son is because he no longer has his car. So he asked if he could go out to the crash site, and he managed to get this information. I believe they ended up having to call the trooper that responded to the scene to get exactly where the car had been. And this led him to the 2300 block of Salt Flat Road, which is quite literally, like I said, a gravel, unlit backcountry road outside of Luling. And it was not anywhere where Jason should have been. It was actually heading north, which is away from where he was supposed to be heading. This made absolutely no sense. Now, when Kent arrived, he realized that nothing was basically done. It was never treated like a crime scene. At this point, I don't think he had a lot of information about the crash itself. And he decided to go ahead and take a bunch of videos and pictures of what he could. I'm assuming his attorney background really pushed him to do that because he was worried that no other officer had done that. Now, when he got there, he was able to see, and I will have a picture of this, tire marks in the road. And this is how he was able to find the crash site. From what I know, there were also still pieces of the car just kind of laying there on the side of the road that had not been taken. And even more disturbing is that before he even found the crash site, about 900 feet south of where the crash was, heading back towards Luling, he saw Jason's clothes scattered all through the road, probably like 100 yards or so. It was his watch laying flat down as if he had set it down. And then I think his shirt was on top of it. And then it was his slides and his shorts and his underwear and then his socks. So this is obviously very strange. And then the fact that Jason crashed and wasn't there to call for help, left the phone in the car, somehow vanished. Things are obviously not adding up. And I also forgot to mention that his wallet was also still in the car. So it seemed as if all of his personal belongings were there, but he wasn't. So at this point, he was reported as missing, and authorities came back onto the scene. Authorities gave Kent the rundown of what exactly had happened in the early morning hours. They said that around 12:31 a.m., a volunteer firefighter just so happened to stumble across the vehicle and called it in, said that no one was at the scene of the crash. So I think because of that, they kind of took their time. Maybe they assumed that someone crashed and then got picked up, or maybe ran off because they didn't want to be found. Maybe they were intoxicated, or, there's a lot of different reasons why people will run from a crash site. So it took about an hour for the state trooper to come and see the scene. Now, from my understanding and what they have said, at the time, no one went inside of the car, but I know that the car's lights were still on, the keys were still in the ignition. All of the other doors were locked in the car except for the driver's side door, and the authorities believed that it was just a single car accident, that there was nobody else involved. There wasn't evidence of another car's paint on the car. There, again, from my understanding, weren't evidence of tire tracks that would suggest another car was there. I know there's a lot of speculation around the picture that I posted earlier, which I will post again, that there are two sets of tire marks, and that clearly means there's two cars. However, this was taken after the car was picked up by a tow truck, so I feel like it's kind of safe to assume that's Jason's car and then the tow truck. But at the same time, you also had a trooper out there. At some point, the volunteer firefighter passed by. I don't know if he just just lived nearby or drove by. So, I mean, it's kind of hard to tell from that picture. And because authorities really dropped the ball by not investigating the second they got there, a lot of this information was lost, unfortunately. There's just evidence that could have been there that was left behind, including these clothes all on the road. And unfortunately, that, in my opinion, has really hindered the progress in this case, because I feel like the authorities, the tow truck driver, the volunteer firefighter, everyone had to have passed by those clothes. They were quite literally in the middle of the road. How were they not seen? Anyways, they did not believe anyone else was involved in this crash. They figured that the most likely scenario is that Jason overcorrected on the gravel road and it sent the car sideways on the driver's side. And I think the back hit a tree, the back driver's side hit a tree, bounced forward and hit another tree, and essentially ran into a barbed wire fence. And since Jason, we know, got out of the vehicle, obviously he would have had to climb through kind of this barbed wire fence to get out. When authorities were finally able to look inside of the vehicle, they found no obvious signs of blood. So visually, they didn't see that there had been some huge injury involved in this crash that would indicate Jason was like in some sort of life-threatening scenario. But they did send it off for forensic testing just in case to check for blood and DNA. And they ended up also finding evidence on the clothing found in the middle of the road that also supported this. So like I said, his clothes were just strewn through the middle of the road. I know that the only sign of blood they found on the clothes was a small spot on what I believe, according to the pictures, were his underwear. Like his boxers. It's just a small part around the waistband, but authorities have kind of chalked that up to him having to get out of the car by a barbed wire fence. Everything else in regards to the clothes looked normal. Authorities said it didn't look like the clothes had been ripped off of him by somebody else or that they were taken off in coercion. Now, when authorities had gone back out there to search again with Kent, not only did he find the clothes and hand them over, but authorities also found more items. So not far away, still heading more towards Lilling, there was actually a book bag also on the road, not necessarily in the middle of the road. If it had been dark, it probably would have been hard to see because it looked like a dark backpack. But there was a book bag belonging to Jason also in the road. And I believe inside of the book bag was a laptop that, from my understanding, was undamaged. So I don't think it was hit by a car or anything. There was a gaming system in there. I know that there was also a small container of marijuana. It was like a handful of joints that were in there. And they, even further from that, found more items. I think there were toiletries, then there was a ball cap and a tumbler that contained Jason's now dead betta fish.
I saw deer, 3 different sets of deer ran by, coyotes ran by, and I didn't see another car, another person.
Hours later, Kent Landry found his way to Salt Flat Road. It was empty and dark.
I kept expecting any moment to see Jason.
The clothes Jason had been wearing, his shoes, even his underwear, were scattered throughout the street. It was 36 degrees.
So I found this fish. I found where the accident was, and I'm the only one who took pictures or video of that.
At the impound lot, Jason's cell phone still sat in his car. No one was searching for him.
I don't know. As a lawyer, I can tell you that normally you're better safe than sorry. It's better to have too much in evidence than not enough in evidence.
So it is quite literally like all of his belongings are just thrown all over this road. And what made this even more suspicious and what has really been baffling people is that the clothes that were in the road, authorities believe, obviously based on everything I've given, that this is actually what he was wearing at the time of the crash because of the blood on the waistband of the underwear. There was a picture taken right before he left to go home, and he's wearing the same red shirt in that picture that they found in the middle of the road. This is why this case has just baffled so many people. There were no obvious signs of foul play when authorities checked the road and Jason's car. No one else appeared to be involved from what they could visibly see. And then for some reason, after he got in this crash, after going the opposite direction that he needed to go on a back road, he then crashed, got out, stripped down entirely. He could have possibly put clothes that he brought with him on. I don't know if there would have been room for that, but he possibly could have. But why would he have stripped all of his clothes off down to his underwear in the middle of the road, thrown all of his belongings down, including his betta fish, left his phone behind, left his wallet behind, and clearly he would have been heading back to the town of Lulling, but it was kind of a straight shot. What happened between there and Lulling, and why was he never found? Jason's case did in fact get a good bit of local media attention, probably because it just seemed so strange, and there was honestly no trace of him left behind other than his clothes being left all in the middle of the road. But unfortunately, the media also kind of brought forward a negative experience for the family. I know that one station in the area had asked for or put in a Freedom of Information request, and unfortunately, authorities for some reason just put down there were narcotics in the book bag, weren't very specific, and this news station kind of ran with it and took it the direction of this guy crashed his car and disappeared. Oh, but he had a book bag full of drugs on him. And that was not at all the case, and that really gave the wrong idea to a lot of people. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with disappearances, the second you add any of those like trigger words, like they have an alcohol abuse issue, like they struggle with alcohol, there's alcohol abuse, or they have any sort of criminal record, or maybe they actively use drugs, or even they've used drugs in their past, they are a sex worker, just anything along those lines, people quite literally love to lose their minds about it and dismiss that person, and that gets them a lot less attention. And that's kind of like a mistake you cannot really afford to make in the media. But thankfully, this police department, I know that the case ended up being transferred over to the sheriff's department, but they did end up coming forward and squashing this entirely, which is so important because you don't really see that very often. Usually the police department or the sheriff's office just kind of lets everyone figure it out for themselves. But they did in fact come forward and make a statement saying, no, he did not have a bag full of narcotics. That is not at all the situation. He literally had a small amount of marijuana on him, and we took it, and it's with us. So they were able to kind of calm that down to hopefully keep people's attention on the case. They did say, however, that it is a possibility that he maybe had been using marijuana on this drive, and what they were worried about is that he possibly took some sort of other drug with it, possibly a hallucinogenic, something along those lines that may have really triggered some sort of paranoia, or something that made him confused, disoriented, and may explain why he stripped all of his clothes off and then just vanished. But unfortunately, they don't know for a fact. There's no evidence that he had any other drugs on him. There's no evidence that he had been using marijuana during the drive. So that's quite literally all just speculation. His family at this point was just confused and upset. They had no clue why on earth he would have been down these back roads to begin with. Why on earth, if he got in some sort of car accident, wouldn't he just call the cops and wait for someone to come and help him, or call his parents? Why would he have just run off? This just didn't seem like Jason at all. Authorities decided their best bet was to just kind of start questioning everyone that knew Jason to figure out if he was planning on meeting anyone in Luling, or if he had told anyone he was going there, if he had told anyone that something was wrong that night. But everyone they spoke to also had absolutely no idea why he would have been in that location. They couldn't find anyone at all or any evidence that he was planning to meet anyone in that area. Everyone was very cooperative when authorities questioned them, so there was nothing at all from this that pointed them in any sort of direction. Texas EquiSearch ended up coming out to immediately help authorities search. They did check all of the local rivers and creeks. I know in this area it's mainly farmland. From what I've heard Kent describe, it's a lot of cattle farmers, which makes a lot of sense. So there is a lot of different ponds, irrigation ponds and watering ponds and little creeks running through. All of those were searched in like the immediate area. I know that they had over 100 highly trained, like in total, volunteers out helping with the searches. I think at one point they at least had 50 different people out there at one time. So these weren't like small searches. And if you know anything about Texas EquiSearch, Tim Miller, again, I'll get into that when I do my Texas Killing Fields video and the work he does. He's found so many individuals that are missing. They do immaculate work. So it was very kind of shocking when nothing was really found. They even did a 3-day aerial search, which I think in that aerial search, they were able to cover 49.5 square miles, which is a little over 31,000 acres around the crash. That's what they did just an aerial search wise, but I think on foot and horseback and ATV and things like that, they were able to cover almost a 10-mile radius around the crash site. That's a long distance. But again, after 9 days, they didn't find anything at all. No sign of Jason. And considering the most likely option is that he left on foot, and if he had in fact taken his clothes off heading towards Lulling and it was a straight shot back to Lulling, why didn't he end up there? And if something happened between there and Lulling and they searched that whole area, why couldn't they find him? They decided after the 9 days to end the search, and Tim Miller said that it was simply because there were no specifics. Like, there was no exact location that anyone believed for him to be in, and they searched all around the crash site, and they felt confident that they thoroughly searched it enough. They did everything they could, and they said that if somehow police were able to get them a more specific location to look at, that they would absolutely come back and offer their help once again. Now, after EquiSearch left, I know that authorities had also been searching. I know that by late December is when the sheriff's office took over the case, but I'm not sure exactly how many searches happened in that time frame. There's not a lot of information on it, but I'm assuming that either the family or the sheriff's office was in fact going out and searching still in these areas. I have seen that helicopters were brought in fairly early on in the search, and they used infrared. Again, if he left on foot and was walking around or wandering around within that next day or two, it's likely the infrared would have picked him up, but still nothing. It's not like they got to this crash site and he disappeared and it was days until they figured this out. Authorities also were working hand in hand with the Texas Rangers. I believe that is retired law enforcement and PIs, if I'm not mistaken, that makes up the Texas Rangers. So they were working with them. I mean, you had numerous different departments working, local areas that were helping search. I know that there wasn't any private property, at least that I'm aware of, that wasn't searched in that area. Even the farmers out in that area, they went out and searched for themselves because who knows their land better than they do. They were very helpful. They went out on foot. They searched all of their land. They checked all of the places that they knew someone could possibly be hurt or possibly be stuck. And Kent said it perfectly in the interview with John Lorden. These people are taking care of animals, they're taking care of cattle, and it's their business to make sure these animals stay safe and unharmed. So if there is even one spot where a cow could get stuck, or if there's one spot that just could even potentially present the smallest amount of danger, they know about it so that they can keep their cattle away from it. And if their cattle will be safe on the land, then a human being should be. But all of these individuals weren't able to find any sign at all. And obviously these search and rescue teams also were coming onto these different properties and searching, and they also weren't able to find anything. Now, I know that by February, Texas Search and Rescue came themselves to search everything. They also brought over 100 volunteers, just like Texas EquiSearch. They brought all of the heavy equipment they could. They brought in helicopters. They brought people on horseback, ATVs. There were drone used, people on foot. Water rescue came in. I believe they also brought some sort of side sonar. They had everything possible, like all of the equipment, and they searched everything again, and still no sign of Jason. At one point, scent dogs were also brought out to the site of the crash, and they actually did get a hit. And this was kind of the first big, exciting piece of information that seemed like it might progress the case a little bit. The dogs ended up leading authorities to a nearby pond. I don't know the exact location of this pond. I'm not sure how close it was to the crash site, but I do know they hit this pond, so they decided to drain the entire thing. They wanted to make sure they could see everything in there and rule out that Jason was there, and they drained it and they found nothing. So really the only thing that authorities had left was hoping that someone in the public may have seen him. Did someone at one of the nearby farms hear the crash, or hear something else happen? Did he go to anyone's house to say anything? Did surveillance in Lowling catch him that night? Did he maybe make it back to the town, but everything was kind of shut down? So authorities decided to, first of all, put a plea out to the public that anyone who has a private security system, check through it, send anything if they believe it could possibly be Jason. But they also went through hours and hours and hours of security footage that's all throughout Lowling that they had access to. And despite checking all of it, there was not a single sign of him. Authorities went ahead and put in a warrant to have access to, his phone the best that they could, and social media sites and his laptop. I know that they were able to go through most of the information in his phone and his laptop, but from the last I heard, which was a couple months ago, so it may have changed at this point, but they were still waiting on Snapchat. But I think they may have had access to that, or at least through his phone, were able to create a timeline. And authorities released this just a few months ago, along with a couple of pictures as well, to hopefully trigger someone's memory, or maybe someone catches something that they didn't. And that's what I'm going to get into now, is the timeline. So at 10:55 on December 13th, that's PM, authorities believe that Jason left his apartment in San Marcos to travel where the Texas University is, Texas State, to travel to Missouri City, which is just like a little bit southeast. And he, during this time, was using the Waze app, which was the app he always used for mapping, and they were able to track him through this app. So by 11:05 p.m., it tracks Jason driving onto Highway 80, which is kind of like the main stretch that he was on for the entirety of his trip. And he was passing under Interstate 35, so he was kind of exiting the city. By 11:07, he had entered Caldwell County, and then at 11:15, he was in Martindale, still heading on Highway 80. At 11:15, he passed over State Highway 130, and by 11:17, he entered the town of Fentress, shortly followed at 11:19 by entering the town of Prairie Lee, and then finally 11:21, he was in Stairtown. Now, the next bit is when he enters Lowling. At 11:24, the Waze map tracks him as being officially in Lowling, still on Highway 80. Through an intersection that is Hackberry Street and still Highway 80, but once you cross over that intersection, it turns into Austin Street. Now, at this intersection, he stopped using the Waze app and got on Snapchat. Now, my thought process behind this, because everyone was trying to figure out why he would get off the map app if he needed it. He drove most of through the country into, the larger town of Lowling using the app. Now, once he's in Lowling and he knows he has a few intersections until he has to do something again, my assumption is that he felt safe at that point to quickly get on Snapchat because he was in a city and he felt it was less likely he would get lost. Maybe he knew he could rely on signs if it came down to it. So I think that's probably why he got off of that and onto Snapchat. But from my understanding, no one has come forward saying they messaged him on Snapchat or that he reached out to someone else on Snapchat. It's kind of all up in the air on who he might have been talking to. Was he maybe trying to say something to someone? Was he trying to meet someone? That's up in the air. And from what I know, Snapchat has not answered that question for authorities yet. So either way, he's on Snapchat, continuing down East Austin, and he hit the intersection of Magnolia and 183. At this intersection, his digital footprint entirely stops. So he doesn't get back on Snapchat. He doesn't get on the Waze app. So I'm assuming at this point he's off of Snapchat. You would think he'd get back on the Waze app to kind of start the directions again. Because in order to get home, he should have taken a right on 183, which would have led him to I-10, which would have led him into Houston. But there's literally nothing. And authorities checked to see if his phone was turned off, if there's some sort of indication of foul play. But from what they're reading and what we know based on how his phone was found, his phone was on. His phone was on. It was fully working. He had service, but for some reason, he just stopped everything. From this point, they kind of had to make assumptions as to what he did next because of where he ended up. And he, instead of turning right on 183 where he should have, He went straight through this intersection, which turns into Spruce Street and ends up kind of like veering to the left. So instead of making his right, he's going to the left, the opposite direction. And once you're on Spruce Street is really when you start hitting the country. You're leaving Lulling, you're kind of going out to the middle of nowhere. It's very unlit. It is clear you're not on a highway. It turns into like a gravel road, and Spruce Street eventually ends up turning into Salt Flat Road, and in the 2300 block is where he crashed. And from what I've looked at in the Google Maps, from that intersection to the crash, it's about 5 miles. So in my opinion, that's kind of a far distance to go, especially in complete darkness, and realizing it's a gravel road and not turning the map app back on. According to his father, this was the first time he had taken this drive at night, and he'd actually only taken the drive in general a handful of times. This was a very common route, though, for people to go home to Houston. It was, I'm pretty sure, like the only way to go. It was at least the fastest way. So it was a very common trip for a lot of people, but he just had not really gotten used to it, which, I mean, is why he was using the Waze app to begin with. So it's very possible that he just hadn't turned the app back on yet. And so again, instead of taking that right, he thought he had to take a left. But at that point, why wouldn't he get his phone? Did he drop it for some reason while he was on Snapchat? And that's why he ended up in between the seat and the center console. And that's why he couldn't get help. But then at that point, you'd think he would just stop or pull over and get some sort of help. And his father actually spoke about this being a possibility, that at that intersection, he maybe dropped his phone, pulled over to the side, and decided to look for it, and possibly someone came and tried to carjack him. I have a hard time believing that as a possibility, because this person then went on to crash the car and didn't take any of the high price items, left the book bag, left everything. And again, I kind of find it hard to believe that he would have driven for a good 5 miles, which would have taken roughly about 7 minutes going the speed limit. I have a hard time feeling he would go that far in the very obvious wrong direction without pulling over and just getting his phone. I know maybe it's possible that that's why he swerved. Maybe he was reaching for his phone and looked up after coming around a curve, realized he was about to maybe go off the road or hit something and swerved, and he really overcorrected. But again, that's such a long distance. And I don't think someone for 5 straight minutes would be fumbling around trying to get their phone while driving. Regardless, for some reason, he didn't get back on his phone. He made the wrong turn and drove pretty far down after the wrong turn, crashed the car, stripped down, and ran. And that just does not seem normal. If you were thinking clearly after a crash and you were kind of in your right mind, I feel like everyone's first reaction after a crash is to call for help. We know his phone was on and it was an option. Could he just not find it? And maybe he figured the fastest way to get help was to kind of walk off and ask for help. Possibly. Was he possibly too panicked and shaken to kind of stop and look for help? Imagine it being late at night, you can't find your phone, and you crash in the middle of absolute darkness. I can imagine that that would cause a lot of panic and a lot of fear. So again, maybe he thought the fastest option was just to walk off. But why on earth, as he was walking off, did he take all of his clothes off? Now, I know that it was an unusually cold night in the 30s there in Texas. A lot of people have theorized maybe he was suffering from hypothermia, and when that happens, you have the tendency of feeling like you're actually really hot, so you take your clothes off. But since someone stumbled across the car so quickly, I feel like that was too short of a time frame for that to start to happen in those temperatures, but I could entirely be wrong. I'm not, a doctor. I'm not a scientist professional. Who knows? But then at that point, he left all of his belongings. He dropped his backpack. I just don't get that thought process. So that kind of leads you to wondering if maybe he was not thinking clearly. Now, obviously, there's going to be someone in the comments and someone that suggests, and police have even stated that it's possible he was smoking marijuana on his drive home. He's a college student driving home late at night for Christmas break. Clearly he came supplied. Maybe he thought on this late night drive he would just go ahead and light up and enjoy the car ride, which is very possible. Nothing that's unheard of. And maybe it triggered some sort of paranoia or issue after the crash. Maybe that rush of adrenaline did something. I just don't know how possible that is. Or if that's not the case, maybe he simply hit his head and was suffering from some sort of concussion. Granted, there was no blood or anything to suggest he hit hard enough to break skin, but I feel like there's still a potential there for a concussion, and he just was maybe disoriented and confused, and that led to the following events. All of this seems very plausible. However, I really struggle with the fact that if he walked off, he was looking for help. He clearly was heading back towards Lowling when he walked off. Probably would have followed the road unless he was not in his right mind and tried to cut through fields and all sorts of things. But if he was on foot and they started searching that fast and people were driving on that road clearly, how was he not seen? How was he not found? I'm struggling so hard with what happened after the crash. And especially if he was, disoriented or something was going on and he'd hit his head, I feel like that might lead to him not making it very far away from the crash site. Whether that means passing out somewhere or, getting exhausted and falling asleep, or just being so panicked he just sits down and totally taps out. So I feel like he would have been found, especially when 31,000 acres and the area was searched. So that kind of leads down the idea of foul play. Now, authorities have said that there's no evidence of foul play. However, they also did not properly collect evidence whatsoever. So I have a hard time being like, oh yeah, you're right. No evidence of foul play when they didn't process the scene when the car was found. They left the clothes and items in the middle of the road as they passed by them. No one even knows if there's been an interview with that original responding state trooper or the volunteer firefighter or the tow truck company, if they have said that they saw the clothes there, or if somehow they ended up there after the fact. Did someone go back and rummage through his car? But again, obviously theft wouldn't be the motive because they left gaming systems and laptops and marijuana and his wallet and all of these things behind in the car. So it makes you wonder, if he somehow made it out of that gigantic radius that was searched so quickly, did he become some sort of victim of circumstance? Did some crazy person drive down the road and see him and pick him up with him not knowing there are bad intentions? Did he have someone possibly follow him? Did someone order him to take his clothes off and do something? That honestly almost makes me wonder about fraternities. Just saying. I don't know if he was trying to get into a fraternity of some kind. Was that some sort of evil hazing that went wrong and now they're covering it up? And then you have to think about the crash itself. The area of the crash doesn't appear to be anything but a straight shot with just like a little bit of curves here and there. Did he see an animal and swerve? We're talking about Texas country. I'm sure there could have been possibly wild hogs. There could have been deer. There could have been coyotes. Was there some big animal that ran across the road and then he crashed? But again, I just cannot ever, in any of these scenarios, get to any sort of explanation that why would he have taken his clothes off? I don't get it. Was there someone in the road and he swerved? I doubt anyone with bad intentions would kind of sit on a back road like that not many people are likely to travel looking for a victim. But also, people that do things like that don't think logically. So they could totally think that's a reasonable thing to do, but is that very likely? I have absolutely no idea. So then there's also like the possibility that someone, like I said, followed him from school. But why would someone have those intentions? Maybe was that Snapchat message to him connected to it in some way? Like I said, fraternity, or we know he was getting marijuana. Did he have a job? Was he able to pay for it? Were his parents giving him money to pay for that? Or could he have possibly gotten in a situation where he owed someone money? There's just so many different things, and unfortunately, because none of them really make sense and fully follow the track and timeline of what happened, and police work wasn't done properly in the beginning, and there's no evidence left behind, I can see why this case hasn't been solved yet and why everyone's just so baffled and confused. Because it could very easily be an accident that he just made the wrong turn, got lost, panicked, saw an animal, went off the side of the road, hit his head, got disoriented, and walked off. The only reason I struggle with that is because he has not been found in that area. I've even seen it mentioned that maybe he was in fact under the influence of something and he crashed and was scared and ran off. However, when that happens, people typically will show back up eventually, or they'll go somewhere safe. Did that maybe happen and then he realized he was lost and fell victim to his surroundings and being in the middle of nowhere? literally the list of theories can go on and on and on. Now, I know that as of a month ago, I don't know if it's just the family pushing for this or if it's the family and authorities. I don't know if authorities are on board, but I see that they're trying to get a GEOFENCE warrant, which is actually a huge deal. I know that a lot of people may have an issue with it because it could kind of be considered like a breach of personal privacy. I've spoken about situations kind of like this before, and majority of people were totally not on board for things like this, which was kind of surprising. But basically, a GEOFENCE warrant would create a black box, so to speak, of the accidents. You know, planes have black boxes. They show like what happened in those last few moments and the surrounding events. And this essentially would take a certain area around the crash and a time before the crash, during the crash, and then afterwards. And anyone with a cell phone or anything that went through that area would pop up as being someone in the area at the time this all happened. Now, obviously, because there's no obvious sign of foul play or that anyone else was involved, but there's nothing else to go off of, I think it would be so beneficial for this case to have access to a warrant like this so they could see, and really rule out, was there anyone in this location at the time? If there was, here are the people. Let's go talk to them. Let's question them. Let's see if they saw anything. It doesn't even necessarily have to be this person's possibly responsible. Could they have seen him walking? Could they have seen something that will benefit this investigation? And again, like I said, because there's just so many possibilities here, being able to see this and rule either foul play or someone possibly being there to witness this out would be absolutely massive and might be able to help authorities focus their attention the proper direction to really start pushing ahead. Now, I have not seen any updates. I could have easily missed them, but I've looked at the Facebook page, which I have linked down below. I've looked at all the recent news articles, and the most recent was just the announcement of trying to get the GEOFENCE warrant. So I am crossing my fingers that in the next month or so, they are given a yes or no and are able to do this. I really think this will hold a lot of answers for authorities and for the family. Right now, there is a $10,000 reward for information that is specific that leads authorities to Jason's whereabouts. I know that the family had a bunch of different conditions kind of connected to the information given. They have an anonymous tip line that's connected to this. I know that he's an attorney, and I think Kent actually wrote up a whole kind of like disclosure and agreement for someone who comes forward with information. They quite simply just want to know where Jason is. They've made it very clear that this is not so they can, pin someone down and come for them legally. They don't want any like revenge or anything like that. They simply want to know where Jason is, and this reward hopefully will draw someone out that knows something. Now, like I said, it has to be specific. They've asked for people to not say things like, oh, I've seen him at this one homeless camp, or I saw him on this corner, or I think I may have seen him at the gas station. They want specific information that authorities are able to use that then directly leads to him. And if all those conditions are not met, the reward will not be given. If you want to be updated as soon as possible on everything related to Jason Landry's disappearance, definitely go and follow the family's Facebook page. There's a lot of information there. As I said, Kent is a pastor, and the church that he works with has done a lot to help his family out. I know that they've held a vigil before. I'm sure they will continue to do vigils. There's like a constant prayer chain that they have going for the family. I know that there have been a lot of people in the comments recently on the Facebook page suggesting that the family open up a GoFundMe so that people can contribute to make the reward a little bit higher. I have not seen them put one out yet, but if they do and you see it before me, please DM me or email me and let me know. But if I catch it first, I will leave it down in the description box below for you guys to help. As I stated, the family has set up an anonymous tip line. If you have any information that could potentially lead to Jason's whereabouts, definitely leave it there. There's also the sheriff's office that you can connect with. I think the lead detective I also should have listed down below as well. So if you have any information at all about Jason Landry's disappearance, if you saw him that night, if someone has said something to you, if he said something to you before he left school, please do not hesitate to reach out. Just as kind of a brief description of Jason, he was a white male, just over 6 feet tall, weighing around 170 pounds. He has brown hair, brown eyes, and it's believed he could possibly have like a full beard at this point or a goatee. Hopefully there are answers soon in this case. I know that it seems authorities and local search teams in the family are doing everything they can to try to locate Jason. Hopefully this reward does in fact bring someone out. But that is all that I have for you guys today. Don't forget, all links you need to contact anyone with information about Jason's disappearance is linked down below. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Go ahead and do so you can become a part of the Hallen fam so that we can hopefully bring them home together. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.